Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm super excited about our speaker today, and I'm here also to welcome him from the Immigrant Solidarity and Action Group. This Tuesday, something that the Immigrant Solidarity and Action Group is going to be having a critical reading of Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, and we'll be reading from the introduction through chapter 4. And it's a good way to fit today's topic to have a little bit from that book. We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from the threats of tyrants. This is a misguided reflex. In fact, the precedent is set by the founders demand that we examine history to understand the deep sources of tyranny and to consider the proper response to it. Americans today are no wiser than Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. So if you'd like to join that group, who will be doing a critical reading of Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, that starts this Tuesday at 6 o'clock here at First Church. It is such a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Nicolas Lampert. Nicolas has used the power of art organizing to build community and solidarity within the Teachers Union, Immigrant Rights, the work of the Justseeds Artists Cooperative, and Voces de la Frontera. Nicolas is the area head for the Community Arts Program in the Department of Art and Design at UWM. Nicolas's book, A People's Art History of the United States, is part of the People's History series edited by Howard Zinn. And a great introduction of Nicolas is something that he wrote in his book, The People's Art History of the United States. He wrote, "Collectively, my hope is that this study serves as a call to action for more artists to become activists, and conversely, for more activists to employ art. For the benefits are vast. When social movements embrace artists, they harness the art of those who excel at expressing new ideas and reaching people in ways that words and other forms of media cannot. They harness the power of visual culture. And when artists join movements, their work, and by an extension their lives, takes on far greater meaning. They become agitators in the best sense of the word, and their art becomes less about the individual and more about the common vision and aspirations of many. Their art becomes part of a culture of resistance." First Church, it's my pleasure to introduce Nicolas Lampert.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I did spend 10 years of my life writing that book in the early 2000s, and had the honor of meeting Howard Zinn many times, who was one of my heroes and mentors. And my book said it was vital for artists to be part of movements. And the last 15 years of my life has been all about that, directly working in movements. And I'm the volunteer art organizer for Voces de la Frontera, which I will talk about a lot. The title of my talk is The Power of Art Organizing. I really want to stress two things. The word organizing. We know that history has changed through organizing and through movements. It's powerful movements that have shaped societies around the world. And we aren't going to get out of this mess without organizing. But you also have to harness art, and I want to make the case why art is such an essential part of organizing, and also why the work of artists takes a lot of organizing. It has to be really well thought out. And even though I've been an artist all my life and I teach in the art department at UWM, we are all artists, meaning we are all creative people. And Art Builds, which is the key tactic I use, involves everyone. There's some great people in this room who were part of the Art Build, who took part, who made an incredible banner for the May Day March, and who helped tremendously bringing up the signs and helping out at the march at this last May Day March. So this was a shared effort by many, including many in this room. Just a quick handful of examples of how key art was to movements. This is a SNCC poster, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's one of the best slogans I've ever seen. It says, "Come, let us build a new world together." And they are kneeled in prayer, but also praying for a better world. And of course, John Lewis is the individual on the left. But this was a very significant photograph because Danny Lyon took it. Danny Lyon at that point was a college student at the University of Chicago studying photography and history, and he dedicated the next 2 years of his life to being the staff photographer for SNCC. And that SNCC knew that they needed photographers in their ranks when they're going to the most dangerous parts of the country, and especially very rural parts, that they needed photographers. And so this was a Danny Lyon photograph, but it was Julian Bond who really understood the need for photographers within the ranks. On the ACT UP movement in the 80s, confronting government inaction, Reagan's inaction against the AIDS crisis, really harnessed the power of art in ways that we perhaps have not seen before or now. ACT UP had art affinity groups within its ranks. One of the famous ones was Grand Fury. It was just a design collective of 12 people that were part of the movement, but they said, our focus is art. Let us do what we do best. Let us design. We're part of the movement. We know the issues, but let us design, and they did. And they really framed this issue to the public and got the public to really pay attention. You obviously might know the silence equals death slogan and the pink triangle. This was all done by a handful of people who are designers in the movement. Art can inspire us, especially when it's not your typical slogans. This march, part of the Black Lives Matter movement, the banner was done by JR, a very famous street artist from France, and it was just the eyes of Eric Garner. And this is what led the march. Good friends of mine were behind the organizing for 2014's People's Climate March in New York City in 2014. And I show this image because there was 6 to 8 months of organizing, thinking of how do we visualize, how do we organize a march, how do we reframe it, and how do we use the power of creativity. I tell my students that they're at the forefront of change every day because they're always problem solving, and they're always using creativity to imagine a different world. This is what these organizers did. They critiqued the environmental movement of being too white, too upper class, too focused, even though it's incredibly important to be focused on nature, the forests, the climate, but not looking at real life struggles of those most impacted on frontline communities. And they wanted to reframe this march so that it involved everyone. And in the planning meetings that went on for months, they envisioned, let's put the frontline communities, the indigenous communities, the communities that had just been hit by Hurricane Sandy, the communities that are struggling with poverty at the front of this march and at the front of the solutions. So the entire march was organized with this epic gathering that had 300,000 people. And I went out from Milwaukee and helped with the organizing and the art build ahead of it, and it was just awe-inspiring that New York City, from essentially 55th Street all the way up to 86th, was lined up. It was lined up in the march that you had the frontline communities, the indigenous communities at the front. Then you had labor and so forth, the scientists. And it was carefully planned and carefully organized. And then the art was laid out in the streets for people to gather, and this is what the march looked like. It looked like our communities, our diverse communities of color. It looked like our urban communities, and involved everyone. This was such a significant moment. And these were teaching tools for me to really learn, because a lot of things that I put into the art organizing in Milwaukee are things I've learned from allies across the country, across the world. And Milwaukee is now teaching a lot of people as well. So what can art do? Art inspires us, but it also becomes a focal point for the media. And the media loves to photograph these types of images. This is where it becomes so important. So the next day there was articles all over the world, but you can see even the New York Times headlines, the key photos were that of the art and the creative actions that put forth the message. So I've written about a lot of these uses of art throughout history. My book is not an all expansive survey. It looks at select examples through 250 years, but it's really meant as a teaching tool to inspire more artists to use activist art and more movements to harness the power of artists. So I really want to focus on Voces de la Frontera, which is Wisconsin's leading immigrant rights organization and one of the most famous immigrant rights organizations in the entire country. Also a very diverse organization that everyone is welcome. Anyone in this room, any of your friends can join Voces. It's a $30 a year membership, and it's meant to be a diverse movement. Obviously focusing on immigration, but immigration impacts us all. I would make the case that Voces is arguably the strongest movement this city has seen for decades, and it keeps getting stronger. Not just fighting for immigrant rights, but for education, for workers, for the environment, you name it. It's been an honor and one of the great privileges of my life to be part of this movement and to volunteer for it. I volunteered simply by saying, how can I help? And this was in 2015. Christine Newman-Ortiz said, we're a small staff in Milwaukee, even though we have chapters across the state, but we didn't, at that time, they did not have a full-time designer, and they really needed the assistance of artists to help do things like the May Day poster. And I did the design for the 2015 poster, and I've been working with them ever since on a weekly basis. But one thing I critiqued was it is problematic when a movement only has one artist working in it, and that artists can burn out, artists can get sick, artists can get tired, they can get overextended. What we needed was people power. We needed many artists. So after the tragedy of the first Trump election in 2016, we knew that his policies were going to come down hard on the immigrant community and the nation and the world. And we started, this was completely inspired off Grand Fury and ACT UP. We inspired a group called Voces de los Artistas, which was an art affinity group. And this way, artists from across the city and beyond could join, but they didn't have to do the knocking on doors, the telephone calls, the other things that the organization was doing. They could do art in solidarity. And within 2 weeks, we had 40 artists in our ranks. And talented artists, printmakers, photographers, videographers, painters, muralists. And then the marches started looking like this. They started popping up in much greater numbers. This was all done with the Voces comms team, the communication team. So it wasn't just artists doing whatever they wanted. It was having meetings, listening to Christine Newman-Ortiz and the comms director on what was needed, because those folks, especially Christine, knows what's needed best. They're in the movement every minute of the day. And then this march that happened, which was the most beautiful title, was the march was called the Inauguration of Our Resistance. And it happened even before, right as Trump stepped into office. A year later, this is what the marches looked like. And friends from across the country were saying, what is happening in Milwaukee? We've not seen a visual resistance like this in San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia. we're seeing it coming out of places like Milwaukee, like no other. Of course, this was in Waukesha to stop the then sheriff who was trying to deputize the police as ICE agents. And Voces, through the power of organizing and the power of the vote and getting people to vote, got that person voted out of office. Of course, there's a very dangerous sheriff right now in Waukesha. But here's a great example of the power of movements. Voces, we know that the Wisconsin dairy industry runs off undocumented labor, that are one of our main industries is the backbone of that is through immigrant workers. And in 2015, workers from across the state walked off their job, came to the Capitol and said, enough, do not pass this legislation. But you can't see what this is about, the signs, when you look at the 2015 march. If you were just looking at the photograph. Henceforth, when we were back in the Capitol, 2019, and this past Friday at the Capitol, you can see what the message is. And Wisconsin, being one of the harshest anti-immigrant rights states in the entire country, does not allow driver's license for undocumented people, which makes every day one living in fear. Minnesota and Illinois allows driver's license for undocumented people, Wisconsin doesn't. So you can see clearly, if you were just seeing this photo in the news or on social media, the demand is driver's license for all, and this is a key way banners came into play. The talent in this group, the VDLA, the Justseeds Artistes, is profound. You have people like Joe Brusky taking photographs and then sharing them with the artists in the group. And you see Pete Rayland right here had turned one of Joe's epic photographs into this beautiful, iconic graphic. Ceci Tejada using the spirit of creativity, using the monarch butterfly, the migration for all butterfly, migration is beautiful, and using the power of creativity in these play parachutes that everyone's probably familiar with from elementary school. This becomes a perfect a format for protest graphics. And also unity. It takes everyone to hold these parachutes in a circle, and that's where we come together in these movements. So what does art do in the movement? Why is it so important? Well, for one, it defines the goals of the movement. It amplifies the message. It again attracts the lens of the media. So we call this tactical media, that this is purposeful. It also inspires those in the movement. This is hard work. These are really difficult issues that are emotionally draining. And folks in the movement who are doing this day in, day out, brings them joy to see this power of resistance. It imagines a different future, it informs the public, and it shows power and resistance. There's many more definitions. This is not a set list. You might have other definitions of why this art is so important in the movement. But here's just some examples. Voces goes to DC often to march, usually a couple times a year. And in the height of the pandemic, while we were all getting checks, assistance, undocumented people got nothing, even though that they were at work mostly throughout the entire pandemic, keeping our society afloat. So this banner, which was designed by Claudio Martinez, said immigrants are essential, citizenship for all. This was front page paper of the Washington Post because this beautiful banner really attracted the lens of the media, and obviously the issue was so important. So Christine Newman-Ortiz, the director of Voces, talking about the impact of all these artists, wrote, "The impact of Voces de los Artistas in our organizing has been significant in that it has allowed the creative force to match the scale of our struggle, amplify our collective voice, and build community. The ability to have a larger pool of artists with diverse talents has allowed us to develop timely quality art that elevates both our demands and captures inspirational images that symbolize our struggle." Voces gets it. They get the power of art. And it's such an honor to work in a movement that amplifies your work, but it's not just VDLA, it's the community, it's you people who came with banners as well to the Voces-led marches. It's the youth group, Youth Empowered in the Struggle, that's also doing their own art. And it's the musicians that come. So my role, though, has always been visual art. And Voces now has their own building. They had rented a building for decades in Walker's Point, but now they own a 2-story, really a 3-story building if you count the basement on historic Mitchell Street. And in the basement, I talked extensively with Christine and the staff saying, we need a rapid response art space right in the building itself. And in the basement, this is what it looked like in January, not organized. It actually looked like a disaster. And we got to work and organized. And that's what we do. And not only did it have to be an incredible space to make art, new art, but it had to be easy for the movement, for people to collect the signs, get them up on the streets, and put them back. And during the art build that we had the week before the May Day March, it became a fantastic space to work, a very productive space that the community was there, young people, high school students from across the city and Racine were there, many of you were there as well. And this is the power of organizing and thinking about how we can use this art space, because you need art for rapid response. This image goes back to 2014, but when we heard that, when Voces heard that a community member, a parent, was being separated from their family by ICE, we had essentially 8 hours to mobilize and get a demonstration in front of the ICE building downtown. And these images were screen printed in my studio and in the streets, and conversely photographed by the media. But now we have a rapid response space right in Voces, with screen printing, painting, you name it. And that's powerful to have that right in the space of the movement itself. So I spoke about art builds. What are they? They are people coming together to collectively make art for a cause. And art builds have happened all over the country. I actually credit David Solnit in the Bay Area, who's a good friend of mine, as someone who's really amplified this and taught it. He actually did a workshop in Milwaukee 10 years ago, and we've been doing art builds ever since. We do a lot of workshops, a lot of churches do art builds now. You folks did an art build. No one owns a copyright on an art build. They're a key tactic for everyone to use. And you also learn by doing. So there's not one way to do this. But we always amplify art builds in Voces, obviously, as family-friendly events, events where you don't have to be an artist, that we just need collective energy. We did this fantastic art build before the May Day March. And I love this photograph because it shows people coming together. The best thing about the art build is people meeting each other, making new allies. I have new allies in this space now because of the art builds. And people I'll count on and depend on in my organizing for many years to come. It's expanding the circle. The art builds are celebratory, they're fun, but the messages came from the movement. The key banners we had designed were carefully thought out by the Voces staff. They were vetted because messages matter. The thought that's put into it matters. And then the march that happened this May Day, this past Thursday, had crowds estimated at 6,000 to 8,000 people, arguably more if the weather had been better, but still that is incredibly powerful. And this message, the one struggle, one fight, all workers unite. It was a key message from Voces, but also the National Immigrant Rights Organization, FIRM, was using this message in marches all over the country. So it put Milwaukee in solidarity with all the marches happening in Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, you name it. So it was very, very interconnected. Obviously, there was key marches responding to urgent issues that are happening right now. This banner was done by one of my students. We ran the design by the Voces staff, but this is where everyone is a creative person. And a student who had never done a banner before, who had grown up in the South Side, in my mind, created one of the most powerful messages of that march. We handed out over 1,000 patches at the start of the march. This is another way of amplifying the message. Obviously, this is, as we are all, Kilmore, Abrejo Garcia. And then just walking in the march and just seeing the creativity. and the signs. I love this sign that someone made. Immigrant workers and students are vital to America. I also love this banner. So what did this banner do? Define the goals of the movement. It amplified the message. It obviously drew the lens of the attention of the media, and it was shared widely. It inspired those, inspired this room, inspired the crowd, inspired those in the marches. It imagined a different future. That's one of the brilliance of this slogan. Inform the public and show power and resistance. So that was very important. That was, you don't need to spend weeks and months. That was already in your hearts and your minds, and that was a very important part of this march. But long-term organizing, we have to be smarter to win. The forces that are trying to dismantle our democracy are very well organized. They had a playbook. They did. Project 2025, they're very well organized. To counter it, you have to be very well organized. So in my mind, using the power of art and social media is really important. Just highlighting a few people, the Teachers Union of Milwaukee for MPS, MTA, hired Joe Brusky as a full-time social media person and a full-time movement photographer. That union, which not every teachers union across the country, because again, Milwaukee leads a lot in this thinking and this type of organizing. MTA said, we will be stronger if we have social media and a full-time photographer. And Joe doesn't just photograph the teachers' marches, he photographs all the movements in the city. And that shows solidarity and amplifies all our movements. I advocated for a long time to the staff of Voces that they had to hire a full-time graphic designer. And now they have a full-time graphic designer, Harold Mesa from Havana, Cuba, who is now doing art on a daily basis and paid a good salary to do that. That's part of my dream, that all social justice movements have full-time jobs for artists. The other strategy is I teach at UWM and I run the community arts program. So my students are given a choice. They want to be involved in Voces. It's not, you have to. They sign up for it. And we have partners across the city, but many of the students in the class decide that they want to help with Voces. So I had students who were brilliant carpenters make all these stands that hold our signs. I have students helping me at the Voces assembly, screen printing, and doing all this key work. Students helped with painting images, tracing all the banners before the art build even started, and setting up the space. It's amazing what 25 students can do in 3 hours with all that collective energy. I had students who had never photographed or let alone never been in a march, taking the epic photos during the march. I had students design some of the key banners and the patches. This is life-changing, and my hope is that they'll be in the struggle for the rest of their life, because they're so inspired by it. Last few things I want to talk about is it's not over after you march. A key part of this work is archiving it and preserving it for history. What if we didn't have any of the archives of Martin Luther King's organization, or any of the archives of SNCC or Grand Fury, the ACT-UP movement? So a key thing we do is we always save 25 copies of every printed item we do with Voces. And this is something I've really pressed the organization to do, because the organization Voces is too busy. It's always a crisis. It is always a family member is being deported, there is a new draconian law, and there's not time to even think of historicizing. But those of us in academia who love history and love archiving can. And so we have saved 25 copies ever since 2016, not of the banners, but of the printed material. And from time to time, we put them into a box set. And this box set is so key because it raises funds for the art. We sold this box set to these archives, and all the art organizing we've done in Voces has not cost Voces 1 cent since 2017. Every art build's been funded because these organizations paid some pretty good money to have part of Voces' history. But then, in places like UC Berkeley, UC California and Berkeley, the Bancroft library, they had a show on Voces. And I know people in the immigrant rights movement in the Bay Area are saying what they learned from what Voces did inspired their movement in the Bay Area. So this history is really important to share. You can see the British Library has copies, Stanford, you name it, DePaul, Cornell, Yale, all over the country. And the other thing I did is advocate to the UWM libraries that it become the home of the permanent Voces archive, and it now is. So you can go to the third floor, you can go look at the Father James Groppi papers, the Bell Phillips papers, but also the Voces de la Frontera permanent archive. And they have now thousands of items, which is all being digitized as we speak. So this is really part of the ongoing work of preserving this important history and teaching it. And the last thing I want to say is it's very important to organize to win and to be optimistic that the power of collective organizing, the power of resistance needs to be something we practice every day. And also recognize the rest of the world is horrified of what's happening in the United States. That we have allies in every corner of the world that is just aghast at what we're doing. So we're not alone. And these images show the 6,000 to 8,000 people marching who are committed to democracy and committed to justice. And this is the last image that I'll share with you. That we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we do know if we don't organize, we're in big trouble. So I'll close by saying we're all artists here. All of you who took part in the art build and created a banner, you are all part of this art organizing strategy to win. Thank you.
Thank you all again for being here. Thank you to Nicolas for sharing his knowledge and inspiration. This is ongoing work, and if you were able to be part of our art build, or if you were able to be at the march last Thursday, I hope you felt that inspiration. I sure did. Again, if you hadn't heard, one of the ways we're continuing the work is through a critical read of On Tyranny, and that'll start this Tuesday. Thank you so much, and
there's an invitation to join Voces. It's very important. It's $30 a year. You get their announcements when everything they're doing. It also funds the organization, and it's a people-run community organization. So please join. But the more art you do in this building, the better. And come to our art builds at Voces and organize your own.
Can you stay for a few questions?
Sure.
Repeat the question because
It's going through the feed pretty good, Mark. You may not have to.
What is your education background?
My education background's in art. So
Where?
I studied at University of Michigan for printmaking and painting at California College of the Arts for interdisciplinary art. But I should say, art schools, and I work in an art school, do not necessarily teach what I'm showing. It teaches you to be an individual artist, to look at the art world, just the art scene, if you're a designer, more often than not the corporate art world. And so we have to be critical of that as well. We need artists to help solve the major problems of our day and do so collectively. So you're starting to see more and more schools have a community arts program and climate justice art classes, and that's starting to become more of the norm.
I have two things to say. One was walking in the rain, it was so impressive that these signs, they must have been printed on canvas because
Right.
they didn't run, they were intact, they were beautiful. And the last thing, the messages on some of them were so powerful, including my favorite, which was no hate in the dairy state.
The signs are screen printed on muslin fabric, and then they're mounted on wood, but the signs we created in 2015 were out in the streets this past week. And so it's really smart to make them out of that material. And actually this fall, I'll be doing a lot of how-to workshops at Voces, and doing bilingual how to make all this material, so I can share that with Michael and you all.
So I was, actually Margot carried that sign, no infant dairy state. I carried one about not separating families. But I felt very energized and enthused, but I'd like you to respond to the critique that in this last election cycle, that the protests may energize the other side, calling us woke, calling us whatever, and that it may have helped Trump win.
Well,
Backlash.
One thing is, we've got to be very careful not to critique the power movements. The civil rights movement was critiqued too. Martin Luther King was critiqued through all the work that he did. And so there are a lot of forces, but we need the power of organizing. What if we had 300,000 people at that march? What if movements kept expanding? You know, if there's a backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion, we're in big trouble. Because I ask my students, especially our university, saying, should we roll back these? I'm like, say out loud that you're against diversity, equity, and inclusion. No, we should be against the handful of people who has hijacked our government. That's who we should be against. So, yes, there's structurally things. Our media has been so corporatized, and the message, it's hard to reach people, but we have to fight back through mass movements of organizing. We should critique movements, though. Movements are not always perfect. So, yeah.
I understand that on Thursday at 8 o'clock, we're supposed to be at the federal building to demonstrate for that, for the judge. Is that correct?
And it's the 15th, Thursday the 15th. That's Mitch doing her next,
The 15th.
the 15th, yes.
Okay, thank you.
4:08 a.m.
Yes.
I just wanted to say to First Church, first of all, thank you so much. And thank you to all of the people who you are standing side by side with who aren't in this room, but you made reference to. Just so you all know, the reason that we came up with that slogan for our art build is through conversation also with Voces de la Frontera. So they were here, we're in connection with them, and in a conversation with Veronica from Voces, she was very clear that what was important is positive message. And so I was thinking like, okay, what's both very you and something that can be appropriate for this. So this too was something that was sort of aligned with and approved and endorsed by our Voces friends and colleagues. So I really appreciate that and you. And the art bill that he showed pictures of was so much fun. It was really cool to sit at a table with new people and paint with them. It was so easy to get started, I strongly recommend it, so thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, I was in Berkeley, got there fall of '67, and 1/8 of the draft, I was in all the anti-war protests for years and years, and it felt kind of futile. But there was a PBS program within the last year or two, it was about Richard Nixon and the anti-war protests. And apparently some huge demonstration, I think in October or November or whatever year it was, influenced Nixon. He had some plans, I don't know if it was along the harbor in Haiphong or something, some big major escalation. And because of this massive turnout in those protests, he changed his plans. So we didn't discover this until years later. But I think it's important to realize what you said, the power and the importance of these protests.
You know, all the people I study and read, the Zinn's, Chomsky's, have all said, if you're not organizing, you're not going to win. You have to organize. And organizing happens in many capacities, but these mass movements are where it really happens. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you all have a lot else to do today, right?
Well, and service at 11, that's what you're noticing. But let's have, if we could, one more